A man alone in a blizzard, a desperate scratch beneath the snow. Would you risk everything to save a life most have already forgotten? On this frozen night, a buried heartbeat calls out for mercy, and a quiet officer must choose, fight for hope or turn away into the darkness. What if the scars you carry are the only proof you ever mattered? Stay with this story until the end, because sometimes the smallest act of kindness changes everything, and even two broken souls can find a way home. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? And have you ever witnessed a miracle? Let's discover one together. On the edge of Bend, Oregon, the winter came like a quiet reckoning. It swept in overnight, heavy and unrelenting, with a cold that pressed down on everything, burying rooftops, swallowing side roads, clinging to bare branches until the world itself seemed to hold its breath. By midnight, the sky was the color of old tin. Streetlights burned behind curtains of falling snow, casting halos into the swirling dark. Everything was muted, buried, waiting. Cole Harrington drove the north loop of Pilot Butte with the window cracked half an inch, the scent of snow sharp on his tongue, breath freezing in the hollow of his throat. His cruiser's wipers beat a steady, lonely rhythm, pushing aside the drift that kept trying to claim his windshield. The heater hummed, not quite keeping up. On the passenger seat, an old thermos rolled back and forth every time he rounded a bend, but he barely noticed. His mind drifted, over memories that clung like burrs to the edges of sleep, the dull ache behind his ribs that came on worst when the world was this still. It had been 3 years since his father's lungs finally surrendered in the small back room of the house Cole had grown up in. Now, the house belonged to him, and he filled it with as little as possible. A table, a battered sofa, the old radio, his father's coat still hanging behind the door. He worked nights mostly. It was easier to drive when no one else was on the road, easier to stay in motion than to sit in the silence. On nights like this, the world contracted to the inside of his patrol car. The scanner on the dash offered only the static of empty air. Most folks were inside, windows glowing with yellow warmth, television blue flickering behind closed curtains. He wondered sometimes how many people still remembered him as the quiet boy from the riverbank, or if they only saw the badge now, a uniform moving through a world that didn't quite fit him. The road rose gently past a stand of pines, branches thick with snow. For a long stretch, there was only the wind. Then something different. He almost missed it. A noise that was not wind or engine, not the whisper of snow, but raw and thin, muffled and broken. He slowed, rolling to a stop along the shoulder. Silence flooded in as he turned off the engine. The night pressed close. There it was again, scratching, desperate and uneven, barely heard above the storm. Cole stepped out, boots sinking up to his calves, his breath turning to fog in the beam of his flashlight. The world was nothing but cold, white, and the sound, the ragged, stuttering scrape, cut through everything else. He moved along the edge of the road, sweeping the light in slow arcs. Every few steps, he paused, listening. The sound was close. He knelt, gloved hands brushing away loose powder, the cold biting through the fabric with each frantic movement. The snow here was disturbed, flattened and churned, a shallow pit that told of struggle. He dug, first with the light, then with his bare hands, fingers stiffening, knuckles aching as the snow yielded inch by inch. His hand met something solid, a patch of fur, rough and ice-crusted, half hidden in the drift. He cleared more, heart hammering. Beneath the snow, a dog, a German shepherd, big and powerful even under the weight of the winter. Its body lay twisted, one hind leg drawn tight, a rusty chain wound into the matted fur of its neck. The smell was sharp, blood, wet earth, something deeper, older, that made Cole's gut clench. He paused, snow swirling around him, breath held. The dog's chest rose, barely. A thin, rattling exhale clouded the air. Its eyes fluttered, unfocused, lashes edged with frost. They opened, a moment of dark, searching contact. Not panic, not fight. Just that searching, hollow plea. Cole's throat worked, but no words came. He reached for the chain, fingers trembling as he worked the frozen links loose, one by one. Each movement slow, deliberate, as if the world had shrunk to just this task, this moment. The dog whimpered, legs twitching weakly. There was a deep wound above the paw, fresh, bleeding slow into the ice, and old scars that told of years, not days, of hard living. For a while they simply breathed together. Two creatures pressed close to the hard ground, snow still falling, world holding its distance. He remembered, unbidden, the way his father used to say, "You never leave a creature behind." Even now, even in this, something in him refused to turn away. He slid his coat off, wrapped it around the dog's shaking body. The dog flinched at first, then sank into the warmth, the fight draining out. Cole gathered the animal in his arms, struggling to rise, boots slipping. The weight awkward and unexpectedly light for such a big animal. He made his way back to the car, breath coming hard and ragged, snow blinding in the beams from his headlights. The world was silent but for the crunch of his boots and the faint, wheezing breath pressed against his chest. In the back seat, he laid the dog out as gently as he could, tucking the coat around its battered body. For a long time he just stood with the door open, cold flooding over him, listening for any sign that the dog would not slip away. The only sound, that slow, shallow panting, that and the wind and the river somewhere under the ice. He closed the door, sat behind the wheel, hands shaking not from cold, but from something deeper, a throb of anger, grief, memory. He looked in the rearview mirror. The dog's eyes were open, tracking him, a question hanging in the space between them. He started the engine, turned the heat up high, and pulled back onto the road. Ahead, the world blurred into storm. Beside him, the old thermos rattled on the seat, forgotten. Behind him, in the dark, a life he was not yet ready to name flickered, thin but stubborn, against the long winter night. The car was an island in the storm, its old heater pushing a thin tide of warmth against the cold, pressing from every side. Cole drove in near silence, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the edge of his seat, knuckles white beneath the gloves. The roads in Bend weren't made for this kind of winter. Most nights, his patrol route felt routine, a loop along quiet streets and empty lots. But tonight, it felt as if the whole world had shrunk to just him and the half-frozen body, breathing ragged in the back seat. He could hear Briscoe's breath, a wet, irregular rasp, almost drowned out by the whirring heater and the distant rattle of ice against the fender. Occasionally, Cole glanced in the rearview mirror. The German shepherd was curled tightly, his massive body shuddering beneath the weight of Cole's coat. Flecks of snow still clung to the fur on his ears, and his tail, muddy, fur-matted, was curled over his flank, a small defense against the world's hardness. A red traffic light on Wall Street cast a weak circle over the hood, then flicked green. Cole didn't hurry. Each block passed in a hush broken only by the quiet labor of the dog's lungs and the low creak of the seat. Outside, every window glowed with light and the promise of warmth he hadn't felt in years. He thought of his father, those last weeks in winter. The room kept dark, the house silent except for the clock and the wheeze of his father's breath. Cole had kept vigil through those nights, much as he was doing now. Waiting, worrying, hoping for some sign of strength in the failing body before him. There was nothing to do but stay present, hold on. He turned off Main and followed the narrow road that wound toward the edge of town, his headlights bouncing off snowbanks and the silent outlines of closed shops. Ben's animal clinic sat half-hidden behind a shuttered grocery, the front walk swept but already filling again with new snow. The building was old, white paint peeling, porch light glowing yellow over the steps, a faded sign in the window. Dr. Abigail Lane, DVM. Cole parked, engine ticking in the cold. He paused before opening the door, drawing a slow breath as the storm battered the roof. He went to the back, eased open the door. Briscoe's ears twitched, but he did not move. For a moment, Cole only watched the animal, eyes shut, ribs rising in shallow jerks, one paw stiff and angled awkwardly beneath him. Cole reached in, sliding his arms under the dog's chest and hindquarters. The weight was uneven, the fur beneath his hands wet and ice-cold, flesh shivering in waves. Briscoe's eyes cracked open, unfocused and wild, then softened, resignation, or maybe the smallest flicker of hope. Cole lifted him, arms burning from the effort, boots sliding slightly on the icy pavement as he crossed to the clinic's door. He knocked, the sound muffled by glove and wind. Light flickered inside, then footsteps. The door opened a crack, spilling warm air and the scent of antiseptic into the night. Dr. Lane stood there in a wool cardigan, her gray hair twisted back, glasses slipping down her nose. She looked first at Cole, then at the bundle in his arms. No words, only a slight nod. She stepped aside, letting the cold and the wounded dog pass into the halo of yellow light. Cole set Briscoe gently on a faded blanket laid across a metal exam table. The dog's legs twitched, a low whimper rattling in his throat. Dr. Lane knelt beside him, hands practiced and gentle, working silently through fur and grime to find the wounds beneath. She cleaned the cuts, unwrapped the chain, traced the scarring where the metal had bitten deep. Briscoe shivered, but did not struggle, his gaze fixed somewhere distant. Cole stood by the door, shoulders tense, his own breath fogging in the still air. He watched Dr. Lane move, never hurried, never wasteful. Her fingers found a small, battered tag, tangled in the fur behind Briscoe's ear. She held it up to the light. A bit of metal, almost worn smooth, with a few faded letters. Briscoe, K9 Rescue, SFCA. Dr. Roll? Lane did not ask questions. She worked through the night, stitching, cleaning, pressing warmth into cold fur. She whispered, sometimes, soft syllables that seemed meant for the dog alone. Cole waited in a wooden chair against the far wall. The only sound, the tick of an old clock and the dog's heavy breathing. Snow piled up outside the window, dulling the world to a hush. At some point, Dr. Lane paused to wrap a new bandage, then straightened, her face drawn in the light. She looked at Cole, not pity, but a kind of knowing. He nodded once, and that was enough. The hours passed, marked only by the measured drip of saline and the soft click of glass against metal. Cole dozed, waking now and then to check that Briscoe was still breathing, still alive. He remembered old nights on patrol, waiting out storms with nothing but the sound of his own heart and the distant promise of dawn. Now he waited with another soul, a battered animal fighting for one more chance. Outside, the storm howled, relentless and wild. Inside, a single lamp burned above the table, casting shadows across the sleeping dog and the man who had chosen not to leave him behind. No words, no guarantees. Only the fragile hope that dawn would bring warmth enough to keep them both alive. Night clung to Bend like a second skin, the storm flattening the world beneath a heavy, breathless hush. Inside Dr. Lane's old clinic, the hours slid past without measure. The fluorescent light above the exam table buzzed, occasionally flickering, casting long shadows across the pale tile floor. The heat from a battered radiator barely reached the corners of the room, leaving the air sharp, edged with the scent of iodine and wet dog fur. Briscoe lay motionless on the table, his flanks rising and falling in uneven waves. Every so often his ears twitched, his paws jerked as if chasing something in sleep, but mostly he was still, suspended between the world of pain and the uncertain promise of morning. His fur, once thick and glossy, was patched with mud and old scars, some wounds newly stitched, others older, faded reminders of a life spent on the edge of survival. Dr. Abigail Lane moved with a quiet steadiness. She wore a flannel shirt under her white coat, sleeves rolled back, her hands stained with a map of faded ink and recent blood. She murmured soft, shapeless words, not to Cole, not to herself, but to the creature on her table, a language of care that belonged to the space between living things. She lifted Briscoe's paw, turning it gently to check for frostbite. She checked his gums, the slow pulse beneath the skin of his thigh, the ragged line of a wound above the hock. All the while, the clock on the wall counted out the seconds, the storm outside grinding itself into drifts against the window. Cole sat near the radiator, arms folded tight, shoulders hunched. He watched the careful work, each movement small, each pause meaningful. Sometimes he looked at the framed photos along the back wall, pictures of dogs, some grinning, some noble, some old and gray-eyed like ghosts. He wondered how many had come through this place, and how many had left whole. He wondered if Briscoe would be one of them. There were moments when the only sound was the low rumble of Briscoe's breath and the intermittent tick of Dr. Lane's tools. She threaded a new line of suture along a tear in his hind leg, hands so gentle it was as if she could mend not only flesh, but the ache that had built up in the animal's bones. She pressed a damp cloth to the bruises on his chest, cut away the last bits of chain, washed the dried blood from behind his ears. Briscoe did not resist. When the pain was too much, his eyes squeezed shut, but he did not bite, did not growl. There was a weary trust there, fragile as glass. On a shelf by the window, a space heater clicked on and off, adding a thin layer of warmth that barely chased the cold from Cole's boots. He glanced at the door sometimes, half expecting the wind to barge in, half fearing that if he left, the spell of survival would break. He stayed. He waited. The night grew deeper, the world outside erased beneath the falling snow. Dr. Lane finished the worst of the work and left a bowl of water within Briscoe's reach, along with a faded green blanket that smelled faintly of cedar. She washed her hands, her movements slow, shoulders stiff. She looked at Cole, her eyes asking nothing. He nodded, then crossed the room, pulled a chair beside the table, and rested his hand, just briefly, on Briscoe's shoulder. The touch was light, uncertain. Briscoe's head did not rise, but his eyes fluttered open, dark and unblinking. He watched Cole for a long moment, then sighed, a long, trembling exhale that seemed to empty him of everything but the need to endure. Cole's hand remained, motionless, a small pledge made in the hush of the clinic. Midway through the night, the wind shifted. The storm's voice faded to a soft rattling at the window pane. The silence felt deeper than before, thick with things left unsaid. Briscoe slept, curled tightly, muscles twitching beneath the blanket. Cole dozed in fits, waking to check the dog's breathing, to listen for any sign that something had changed. Dr. Lane came and went, checking vitals, recording temperatures, adjusting the IV drip. Once, in the thin blue light before dawn, she found Cole standing by the table, hands braced on the edge, head bowed. She did not interrupt. The two figures, the officer and the wounded dog, stood together in the cold quiet, both shaped by a history of leaving and being left, both refusing to look away. Near sunrise, Briscoe stirred. His ears flicked, nose testing the air. He shifted, tested his weight, winced, but did not whimper. Cole knelt beside him, murmured something soft and wordless, almost a prayer. Briscoe's eyes found his, raw, uncertain, flickering with the first, faint spark of trust. Outside, the first pale light crept over Bend, catching on the new snow and the ice that coated the branches. In the quiet, Dr. Lane watched from the doorway, arms folded, her face unreadable. In that moment, something old and hard gave way, just a little. It was not a victory, not a healing. It was the thin, persistent thread of life, woven between man and animal in the half-light before day. And for the first time since the storm began, Cole felt the stir of something fragile and stubborn in his chest. Hope, battered and half-buried, refusing to be left behind. Morning didn't come with any fanfare, just a slow thinning of darkness at the edges of the frosted window. The storm's violence spent, leaving behind a brittle, waiting stillness. The small vet clinic sat in a pool of cold light, its walls holding the hush of aftermath. There was no rush to the day, only the gradual uncoiling of bodies that had survived the long white night. Cole Harrington had not left Briscoe's side. At some point, Dr. Lane had found an old army cot and set it up beside the exam table, and now Cole sat on the edge of it, boots planted on the tile, elbows on his knees, head bowed. His back ached, and his eyelids burned, but he didn't move. Not really. There was something anchoring him here, a promise or a debt he couldn't name. Briscoe was alive, but only barely. The dog's body was stretched across the blanket, one hind leg bandaged thick, paw poking out at an odd angle. The line of his flank moved with slow, deliberate effort. He shivered sometimes, even in the heated room. There were moments when the pain was too much, and he panted, eyes squeezed shut, claws curling against the metal beneath the thin bedding. Cole watched, helpless, learning the rhythm of those breaths. He remembered another winter, years ago, in a different kind of waiting room. His father, gaunt and hollow-eyed, gripped his hand so tight that it hurt. The only sound was the beep of a monitor and the faint ticking of a wall clock. That was when Cole first understood the particular ache of being powerless, the strange dignity in just staying. He had stayed then, and he stayed now, as if it might change the outcome. Dr. Lane moved around the clinic, checking records, brewing coffee in a battered silver pot, her movements careful and silent. Once she sat beside Cole, holding a faded mug between her palms. She spoke only once, voice low, almost gentle. "He's a fighter, but sometimes it's not about strength. It's about what you've already lost." Cole nodded, the words lodging somewhere deep. He looked at Briscoe's face, and the dark eyes clouded but stubborn, and saw something there he recognized, a refusal to let go, even as the world slipped past. Sometime mid-morning, Dr. Lane cleaned around the dog's wounds. She ran a practiced hand along the dog's side, fingers pausing on a spot beneath the fur. She parted the hair and revealed a scar, puckered and pale, old but deep. Another ran down the dog's shoulder, not as fresh as last night's injuries, but still angry beneath the skin. There were more, scattered along the legs, a web of healed and half-healed history. She showed Cole the battered tag she'd found the night before. Briscoe, K9 Rescue, SFCA. "He's seen his share of trouble," she murmured, eyes on the metal, thumb worrying a groove where the engraving had nearly worn smooth. Cole traced a finger over the tag, turning it between his hands. He thought of all the dogs that came and went through the department. Good dogs. Some who made it. Some who didn't. He tried to picture Briscoe in a different world, running bright and sure down the ruined streets of some California quake, digging through debris, the rush and bark of adrenaline, the pride in a handler's voice. But the image didn't last. He could see the aftermath, too. A single mistake, a hesitation, a collapse, and the way the world looked at those who had failed. He caught Dr. Lane watching him, something unspoken in her gaze. "Sometimes they don't get another chance," she said quietly, "even if they deserve one." Cole didn't answer. He moved back to the dog's side, resting his hand lightly on the broad skull. Briscoe's eyes slid open, glassy with exhaustion, but he did not pull away. The air between them held the weight of shared defeat. For a long time they sat like that, man, dog, and the hush of a world not yet ready to thaw. Cole studied the scars on Briscoe's body and felt the old ache in his chest stir. They were the same, he realized, not in shape or in story, but in the silent tally of things lost. Families, futures, homes that had shrunk to a single chair by a window. Even the victories here were quiet, barely visible beneath the coat of a battered animal. Dr. Lane began her rounds, checking on the other animals, the ancient tabby cat with bad lungs, the rabbit with a limp. She paused at the door to the exam room, watching Cole and Briscoe in the pale morning light. She didn't say anything more. There was nothing to say. Later, as the sun crept higher, Cole stood and stretched, feeling every mile of the night in his spine. He stepped to the window, watched the world begin again, street plows crawling along Main, a few bundled figures moving through the snow, Bend waking up one slow breath at a time. It all looked the same, but nothing was. Behind him, Briscoe shifted, tongue flicking over cracked lips, tail tapping once against the blanket. Cole came back to his side, poured a little water into the bowl, and waited. After a minute, Briscoe nudged the rim with his nose, took 2 trembling laps, then rested his chin on his paw. There was no triumph in it, only a kind of exhausted gratitude. Cole felt it too. The day moved forward, measured not in tasks but in the small, hard-won mercies of endurance. The room was filled with the steady hum of recovery, pain, patience, and the slow, unsteady rebuilding of trust. The old scars remained, but there was a new warmth too, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, neither of them would be left behind again. There was something in the way the world reassembled itself after a storm, like waking up from a long fever and finding all the furniture quietly rearranged. In the gray light, the snow was packed hard along the edges of the street, crusted with dirt and sand. The sidewalks scored with the tracks of plows and the boot prints of early risers who had work to do. Bend moved slowly in winter. Even the river seemed to hesitate beneath its lid of ice. Cole Harrington left the clinic just after noon, face raw from sleeplessness, his mind carrying the tight, unresolved ache of the last 24 hours. The wind had eased, but the cold remained, lingering in the bones and burning at the lungs. He paused on the step, looking back at the clinic's door. Behind those walls, Briscoe lay in a patch of sunlight, paws twitching in restless dreams, stitched and bandaged, but so far alive. Cole's hands curled into fists in his pockets as he walked. He retraced the drive along Pilot Butte, eyes sharp, boots crunching through the hard crust, his movements slowed by caution and habit. The road was mostly empty, a few cars passing at intervals, their wheels grumbling against the frozen ruts. To anyone watching, he looked like any other officer, pacing out the perimeter after a rough night. But Cole wasn't looking for trouble. He was searching for answers that had no clear shape, only hints and residue left in the wake of harm. At the shoulder where he'd stopped the night before, the wind had scoured away most of the tracks, but close to the tree line, he found what he was looking for. The faint impression of tire treads pressed deep into the packed snow, different from the usual municipal pattern, wider and uneven, with an old nick across the rubber that left a crescent-shaped scar at regular intervals. Beside it, a length of chain, a broken link glinting in the pale light, and a handful of black and tan hairs frozen into the crust. He crouched, gloved fingers tracing the prints, mind working through the pattern. It was not only the pain in Briscoe's eyes that troubled him now, but the possibility that he was not alone. Other animals, other owners, other endings left unfinished. He took a few photos with his phone, the cold making his hands clumsy. Every sound, the click of the shutter, the hiss of breath, seemed magnified in the emptiness. He followed the tracks as far as he could, boots slipping on a patch of black ice. They led away from the road, toward the old industrial stretch on the edge of town, where warehouses sat with their windows boarded, paint peeling in long strips. Cole knew these buildings, the stories they told, places where things went to be forgotten, where the world's business moved in the dark, unnoticed by anyone who didn't care to look. He paused at the mouth of an alley, where the snow lay undisturbed except for a single meandering trail, a dragging, uneven line flanked by smaller paw prints, the signature of an animal struggling, then being lifted, then gone. He looked at the door of a warehouse, battered but locked, a chain strung through the handle, rusted padlock hanging loose. He pressed his hand to the door, felt only the cold, nothing moving behind it. Inside his chest, a slow certainty built. He didn't know what he would find here, or if it would matter, but he felt the old rhythm of work moving his limbs, the habit of investigation, the stubborn refusal to turn away. There were stories here, he knew, as there had always been. Dogs left to die, men who disappeared into their own silence, the weight of memory that settled on every street in winter. He took more photos, close-ups of the chain, the strange tire tread, the boot prints stamped beside it. Everything in him was attuned to absence, to the spaces between events. It was never the thing itself, but the echo it left in its passing. When he finally returned home, the sun had started its slow descent behind the pines, throwing long blue shadows across the living room. He shed his boots at the door, the warmth inside alien after so many hours in the cold. His small desk was stacked with files, photos of missing pets, reports half finished, a thin folder labeled Strays, unresolved. He sifted through the papers, eyes catching on the names, each one a story without an ending. Cole sat in the faded armchair by the window, his back stiff, the ache of the day settling into his bones. He held the broken length of chain in his palm, feeling the weight of it, the shape of the question it left behind. He thought about Briscoe, the battered animal fighting for breath beneath a green blanket, the flicker of trust that had passed between them in the half-light of morning. Outside, the streetlights came on, haloed in fog, the town retreating into its old patterns. In the hush that followed, Cole felt the pull of something deep and instinctive, the urge to keep going, to follow the trail, to see this through, not for the sake of justice or even compassion, but because to walk away would be to accept a kind of defeat he could not bear. Somewhere a dog barked. Farther off, a siren wailed and faded. Cole sat alone in the gathering dusk, tracing old scars and new questions, the chill of the world pressed close against the glass. And so the search began, not with a chase or a shout, but with silence, patience, and the small, persistent rituals of a man who would not let another living thing be forgotten. Evenings in Bend fell quietly. As the sun slipped behind the mountains, the river turned black and secretive, and lights came on in homes and diners, yellow squares glowing against the cold. Cole Harrington walked with his head down and collar high, hands buried in his jacket pockets, the air biting at the thin skin beneath his eyes. He kept to the edge of the sidewalk, moving through the old downtown blocks where the paint peeled and the window glass was cloudy with age. He didn't draw attention. The badge was hidden, the car left behind. Tonight he was not the law, just another figure among many, passing through. Each place he entered held the hush of winter, soft radio music, murmured voices, the scrape of mugs across chipped countertops. He stopped at the corner store first, pausing beneath the buzzing fluorescent sign, the glass fogged from heat inside. The owner, Mr. Willett, glanced up as Cole entered, nodded without a word. They had the kind of understanding men acquire when grief has made them quiet. Nothing wasted, nothing forced. Cole bought a pack of gum and a bottle of water, coins left on the counter. He hesitated, then asked softly, "Anyone seen a blue truck by the old warehouses? Maybe late last night?" Willett paused, eyes narrowing a fraction, gaze shifting to the window before returning. "Can't say," he muttered, voice low. "Lot of folks out late. Some don't want to be seen." Cole nodded, pocketed the change, left. That was the way here. No questions, no confrontation. Just the steady accumulation of glances, hints, the sense that everyone knew more than they would ever say. At the gas station, he leaned against the vending machine, watching as a young woman filled her car. He caught her eye, offered a nod. "You drive through industrial lately? See anything strange?" She shook her head, a careful, practiced blankness on her face. Nothing but stray dogs. She pulled away, taillights vanishing into the dusk. Cole drifted farther, boots echoing on the icy pavement, his thoughts circling around the absences, things not said, things hidden. He lingered at the bus station, the benches slick with frost, a payphone receiver swinging in the wind. The janitor swept the steps, eyes averted. When Cole approached, he paused. "Anything unusual by the loading docks?" Cole asked, voice barely above the sound of the broom. The janitor shrugged. "Saw a couple of men unloading crates last week. Didn't look like they wanted company." A pause, then. "They had dogs, I think. Kept them quiet." Cole thanked him, slipped a bill into the janitor's gloved hand. The exchange was silent, careful. There was no room in Bend for confrontation. Here, things were handled by knowing when to keep your voice down, when to disappear. Everywhere he went, Cole felt the weight of watching, curious eyes that followed and then looked away. The town held its secrets tight, wrapped in layers of routine and politeness. Sometimes, walking past the old bakery, he caught the ghost of a memory. Himself as a boy, running through fresh snow, his mother laughing as she brushed the flakes from his hair. That world was gone now, replaced by a cold that seemed to linger even when the sun was shining. In the alleys behind the warehouses, Cole found evidence. The familiar marks, torn plastic sacks, pieces of rope, a faded red collar. He crouched in the half-light, gloved hands sifting through trash, piecing together the fragments. Each artifact was mute, speaking only to those who knew how to listen. He took photos, pocketed the collar, heart beating slow and hard. Sometimes, he caught a glimpse of movement, a figure darting between crates, the flick of a tail in the shadows. Strays, mostly, but every so often something more. A low whistle, a heavy step, the creak of a door closing quietly in the dark. He made notes, mapped the spaces where the world seemed thinner, more dangerous. Cole didn't speak much. When he returned to the clinic, he gave Dr. Lane the collar and a photo of the tracks, saying only, "Might be more out there." She nodded, her eyes grave, pressing a gentle hand to his arm. In the hush that followed, they stood side by side. Two people trying to hold back the tide with nothing but hope and small kindnesses. At home, Cole spread the evidence on his table. The broken chain, the collar, the pictures, clues in a language only the wounded seemed to understand. He ate standing up, barely tasting the food, his mind circling the same questions, until the night grew old and the world shrank to the sound of the wind at his door. The darkness here was never complete, but it was deep. In it, men hid their secrets, animals vanished, and silence grew thick enough to swallow a whole life. Cole sat in his small kitchen, hands curled around a mug gone cold, listening for the faintest sound, a footstep, a whimper, a sign that someone somewhere had not given up. Sometimes all that answered was the wind. Sometimes it was enough to know you were still listening. Nights in Bend always seemed longer after a storm, as if the snow itself could stretch time, pressing every second into a deeper silence. Cole drove slowly, headlights tracing two pale tunnels through the darkness, the cruiser engine purring steady and low. On the seat beside him, his radio was silent. His mind traced the day's questions over and over. Chains, collars, tire tracks, the wordless suspicions that threaded through every corner of town. He turned onto an empty street behind the old lumber yard, the moon just a slice above the horizon. In the passenger footwell, Briscoe's battered leash coiled like a sleeping snake. The metal clasp dulled with age. Dr. Lane had said Briscoe needed rest, but the dog wouldn't settle. He'd spent the afternoon pacing, ears pricked, flinching at every sound outside the clinic. Now, for the first time, Briscoe was beside him, sitting tall and tense in the back seat, eyes focused, nostrils testing the air as Cole slowed near a block of abandoned warehouses. Cole parked in the deep shadow of a loading bay, engine off. He listened. In the hush, even the smallest sound seemed enormous. The tick of cooling metal, Briscoe's breathing, the distant rumble of a freight train heading out across the Deschutes. Then, from behind the nearest warehouse, a flicker, flashlight beams cutting thin lines through the darkness. The sharp silhouette of men moving, their voices hushed, carrying in the wind. Briscoe stiffened, his body coiling with a silent urgency. Cole felt the change, the old training coming alive in muscle and memory. For a moment, they both sat unmoving, hearts pounding, senses stretched tight. Then a muffled yelp, a dog, not Briscoe but another, somewhere out in the dark. Cole eased his door open, boots silent on the crusted snow. He motioned to Briscoe, "Stay," but Briscoe had already pressed his nose to the glass, watching, trembling with a nervous energy too long held back. Cole crept along the side of the building, the world reduced to breath and heartbeat, and the scrape of his coat against brick. The men moved quickly, dragging a battered crate from the shadows, the air sharp with the scent of fear and sweat. Another dog, smaller than Briscoe, cowered inside, its eyes wide, tail drawn in tight submission. Cole's phone trembled in his hand as he snapped a photo, then another, lightless and silent. The men's voices sharpened, angry, anxious, a quick argument. Someone pointed to the dark, the others falling silent. In that moment, a growl split the air, a deep, shuddering sound that seemed to vibrate in Cole's bones. It was Briscoe. He had slipped from the car, limp barely noticeable as he crept into the open, tail low, ears flat, teeth bared. His eyes burned with something old and wild, an echo of the animal he once was, the one that had learned, again and again, that the world could be cruel. The men turned, startled by the sudden presence. One raised a hand, another a length of pipe. Cole stepped from the shadows, voice low and sharp. "That's enough." For a heartbeat, everything stilled. In the cold, breath plumed and froze. Briscoe stood between Cole and the men, body tense but unmoving, his growl a warning that needed no words. The men hesitated. One cursed, spit on the ground. The smaller dog whimpered, pawing at the crate bars. One man advanced. Briscoe did not back down. He snarled, every muscle poised. The man raised the pipe, but Cole moved faster, closing the distance, stepping between the man and the dog, badge glinting in the pale moonlight. "Walk away," he said, not shouting. Just flat, hard, undeniable. The men exchanged glances, fear, calculation, the weight of being seen. Then, one by one, they turned, boots crunching on the snow as they disappeared into the shadows, muttering curses, leaving the crate behind. For a moment, Cole and Briscoe stood alone, the world holding its breath. Briscoe's chest heaved, eyes wild, but as Cole knelt and pressed a hand to his flank, the tension bled out of the dog's body. The crate rattled, the smaller dog pawing the door. Cole worked the latch open with numb fingers. The dog, dirty, ribs sharp, a blue collar nearly embedded in its neck, pressed itself against his legs, trembling. Briscoe stood over them both, watchful, tail low, but his eyes had softened. The fight replaced by something older. Protection, acceptance. They walked back to the cruiser together. Cole, Briscoe, and the rescued stray, 3 figures traced in weak headlights, each step a testament to survival. In the rearview mirror, Briscoe pressed close to the smaller dog, sharing the space, a quiet guard in the hush before dawn. The night had not ended, but something had shifted. A line crossed, an old pattern broken. Cole drove in silence, the leash heavy in his lap, Briscoe's fur brushing his shoulder as the world outside began, ever so slightly, to let in the possibility of hope. Morning in Bend came quietly, as if the night itself were reluctant to let go of its hold. Gray light seeped through the clouds, dusting the rooftops and the riverbank in a thin silver haze. Cole parked the cruiser by the clinic, letting the engine idle for a long minute, breath frosting in the cold air. In the back seat, Briscoe lay curled beside the smaller dog, shoulder to shoulder, eyes half closed, their chests rising in exhausted harmony. No barking, no whimpering, just the silent trust that passed between animals who understood something about fear and rescue. Dr. Lane opened the door before Cole knocked. Her hair pulled back, eyes weary but alert. She took one look at the scene and nodded, stepping aside without questions or ceremony. Inside, the building was warm, smelling of coffee and clean sawdust. Cole lifted the smaller dog gently, feeling the tremor of nerves beneath the rough fur, the hollow in its side where hunger had made a home. Briscoe followed, limping but proud, head held low but steady, his gaze on Cole as if asking, "What now?" Dr. Lane moved with the calmness of someone who'd seen too much pain to be surprised by any new wound. She set up 2 beds by the radiator, old blankets folded over fresh newspaper. She checked the smaller dog's injuries, humming softly under her breath, hands firm and gentle at once. Briscoe settled nearby, tail curled around his body, ears flicking at every sound. Cole watched, silent, his own hands still stained from the night's work. Outside, the world moved on, the slow grind of snowplows, the muffled laughter of school children slipping through drifts, the brief blare of a distant train. Inside the clinic, time moved differently, measured in breaths, in the steam curling from Dr. Lane's mug, in the trembling of the rescued dog as it sniffed cautiously at the bowl of water. The news traveled quietly, as things do in small towns. First, it was Mrs. Taney from the bakery, bringing day-old bread in a brown sack, her voice low and kind. Then old Mr. Rowe, whose hands shook as he left a stack of woolen rags by the door. A child pressed her mittened hand against the clinic window, peering in at the dogs before being pulled away by her father's gentle tug. No fanfare, no headlines, just a steady procession of small gifts, blankets, tins of food, the silent offer of help. Cole felt the change not as a rush, but as a slow thaw, the way river ice cracks in the first warmth of spring. At first, people said little, their glances cautious, uncertain. But the more they saw Briscoe, walking the edge of the clinic yard, his limp steady but his tail just a little higher each day, the more the fear drained away. Children pointed and whispered. The older folks nodded, some remembering their own lost animals, others just grateful for a story with the promise of rescue. Sheriff Pruitt came one afternoon, boots tracking snow onto the linoleum, his expression carved in granite. He surveyed the room, the dogs, the heap of donated supplies. "Lot of folks looking out for these strays," he said, voice rough as a file. He didn't linger, but before leaving, he set a battered thermos of hot soup on the counter. No explanation, no need. Evening settled with less weight. Cole began to spend more time at the clinic, sometimes standing by the door and watching dusk bleed purple across the sky. He didn't talk much, but he carried out small chores, fixing the latch on the gate, sweeping the steps, sitting beside Briscoe in the half-light, sharing the silence. The community's quiet acts mirrored his own, a slow, persistent showing up, a kind of collective refusal to let hardship stand unchallenged. For Briscoe, the world was still a wary place, but there were moments when fear loosened its grip. He lay by the window, sunlight striping his coat, eyes drifting closed as the smaller dog pressed against his side. The new collar Dr. Lane had fitted, soft, green, hand-stitched, hung a little loose at first, but Briscoe didn't try to remove it. He accepted treats with hesitation, then with more confidence, ears perked at the sound of footsteps he was learning to trust. One evening, as snow fell again, a small crowd gathered outside the clinic. Neighbors, children, two elderly women wrapped in bright scarves. They brought more blankets, a tin of homemade stew, and a story about a dog who'd once saved a boy from the river. Cole stood on the steps, hands in pockets, listening, his breath clouding the air. Briscoe stood beside him, shoulder pressed to his thigh, tail giving a tentative wag. No one spoke of the warehouse or the men in the dark. There was no ceremony, no justice proclaimed, only the shared, wordless recognition that survival is sometimes a group effort and that healing comes in the accumulation of small mercies. Inside, as night crept in, Cole watched Briscoe curl up on his blanket, eyes meeting his for a moment. It was enough, a silent promise, an understanding that even the deepest wounds could be met, not with answers, but with the steady, enduring kindness of a community that refused to look away. Winter lingered in Bend, reluctant to loosen its grip. Yet beneath the brittle cold, something shifted, a subtle easing in the air, a hush less heavy, a light more forgiving as each day grew incrementally longer. Snow still hugged the streets in stubborn banks, but sunlight glimmered on window panes and dripped from icicles, promising that the season would not last forever. Briscoe healed in increments. He slept often at first, sometimes for hours, nose buried in his paws, body curled tightly, as if still guarding his most vulnerable places. On good days, he greeted Cole at the clinic door with a tentative tail wag, his brown eyes brightening as the officer knelt to ruffle his ears. The smaller dog, now called Pip by the staff, trailed after Briscoe everywhere. The two, a mismatched pair, their movements oddly synchronized. Cole's life fell into a rhythm he had not known for years. Mornings at the clinic, afternoons walking the riverside trails, evenings at home with Briscoe stretched on the rug at his feet. He still rose early, haunted by old habits, making strong coffee before the sun reached the frost-furred grass. Briscoe would be waiting, ears cocked, ready for the first slow walk of the day. They traced quiet paths along the Deschutes, the air laced with the scent of thawing earth. Cole walked without hurry, boots crunching on old snow, hands tucked deep in his jacket. Sometimes Pip darted ahead, chasing wind-blown leaves, but Briscoe always walked at Cole's side, steadfast, slightly limping, head held low in quiet dignity. There was little need for words between them. The connection was built in gestures. The way Briscoe leaned against Cole's leg when a truck rattled past. The steady pressure of Cole's palm along the shepherd's spine in the evening hush. The soft chuff of contentment when Briscoe settled by the fire, letting his guard down inch by inch. At the clinic, Dr. Lane watched the transformation with a seasoned gratitude, moving through her tasks with a kind of reverence. She adjusted Briscoe's bandages, checked Pip's weight, offered advice and gentle jokes. Cole listened, sometimes smiling, sometimes just nodding, but always present. The staff grew accustomed to his quiet presence. Once a volunteer left a cup of soup on his chair. Another day, a child drew a picture of Briscoe, tape curling at the corners, which Cole tucked into his pocket and carried home. Bit by bit, Cole let the town back in. He exchanged greetings with neighbors at the market, stopped to chat with Mrs. Taney on her bakery run, paused to listen when old Mr. Rowe recounted stories of the river, his voice trailing off into a cloud of breath and memory. Cole didn't offer much in return, but he listened, and sometimes, late at night, he realized he no longer felt the pressing need to escape the world at every turn. The house near the edge of town changed too. Cole repaired the sagging fence, swept snow from the porch, fixed the old radio so music filled the rooms again. Briscoe found his place. A thick rug beside the wood stove, a battered leather collar hanging by the door, a ceramic bowl with his name painted in slow, careful strokes by one of the clinic children. On a morning washed in pale sunlight, Cole opened a small package that had arrived from Dr. Lane. Inside was a new collar, soft leather, warm brown, with a brass tag etched. Briscoe. Home. He knelt, buckling it around the shepherd's neck. Briscoe stood perfectly still, tail swishing once, twice, before leaning into Cole's hands. The simple ritual felt like a benediction. There were no dramatic reunions, no parades or proclamations, just the slow unfolding of ordinary days, colored now by the certainty that neither man nor dog would face them alone. Some afternoons, Cole sat on the back steps, watching Briscoe and Pip tumble in the last drift of snow, the sound of their play blurring with the distant call of geese returning north. Evenings brought a softer kind of peace. Cole would read by the fire, Briscoe's head resting on his knee, Pip snoring from his bed by the door. Sometimes, when sleep was slow to come, Cole would slip outside, letting the cold bite his cheeks, stars clear and sharp overhead. He'd look back at the house, the yellow window light spilling onto the yard, the shape of Briscoe silhouetted in the doorway, and feel, for the first time in years, the weight of loneliness lift. In town, people noticed. The butcher slipped a bone into Cole's hand with a wink. Children vied for Briscoe's attention in the park. The sheriff nodded in passing, the corners of his eyes creasing in a way that said everything that needed saying. Nothing was perfect. The scars remained, visible and not, stitched into the fabric of every day. But something else grew alongside them, a stubborn, hopeful trust, a sense that wounds could heal, and that a new kind of life might be possible. Cole and Briscoe, once two creatures cast adrift, now shared a quiet belonging, built not on heroics, but on the small, steady acts of care that mended the world, one day at a time. By late winter, the days lengthened almost imperceptibly, sunlight lingering just a moment longer on the frost-bitten roofs of Bend before slipping behind the mountains. The river still ran sluggish and dark under the last brittle plates of ice, but here and there water flashed silver in the warming air. In the quiet, people noticed small things, The chatter of sparrows along the telephone lines, the way the light caught in the bare cottonwood branches, the distant, hopeful rumble of thaw. Cole Harrington's mornings began with the hush of waking before dawn, coffee brewing in the dark kitchen, Briscoe's steady breath audible from the foot of the bed. He moved through the old rituals, a hand on the dog's head, a glance out the window at the pale sky, the gentle scraping of boots on the porch. In those moments, the house felt less like a place he inhabited and more like something alive, reshaped by presence and patience. Briscoe was himself again, or as close as any soul could be after such a journey. His limp had faded to a memory, the fur grown back over most scars. Each day he greeted the world with a cautious dignity, watching over Pip as the smaller dog chased crows in the yard, accepting a pat from a neighbor, rolling in the soft, wet grass left behind by melting drifts. He still startled at sudden noises, an engine backfiring, the clang of metal, but no longer hid. Instead, he pressed close to Cole, drawing comfort from nearness, breathing in time with the man who had refused to leave him behind. Spring's approach came not with fanfare, but in the smallness of things. The return of birdsong to the hedges, the way Mrs. Taney's bakery smelled more of yeast and cinnamon as windows were cracked open, the laughter of children skipping rope in puddles along the curb. Life did not change overnight, but day by day, the world let go of its silence. People waved to Cole more often now, and sometimes he found himself waving back. Some afternoons, Cole sat on the front steps with Briscoe beside him, watching the sun melt the last crust of ice from the porch railing. Pip would dart in and out of the open gate, chasing after nothing in particular, always circling back, always checking that Briscoe and Cole were still there. They watched as neighbors passed, some stopping to offer a gentle greeting, others just tipping their hats as they hurried by. No one mentioned the winter or the dark days that had come before. It was enough to be present, together, under the slow changing sky. Inside, the house was transformed. Cole hung a row of photos along the hallway. Briscoe, Pip, snapshots from the first morning walks along the Deschutes, a drawing gifted by a child from the clinic. The battered old radio played softly, sometimes static, sometimes a melody that made Cole pause and listen, memory rising and falling in waves. In the evenings, Briscoe would settle near the fire, Pip curled against his side, Cole stretched out with a book or just watching the embers. There was no need for words. The quiet held everything that mattered. The trust rebuilt in the silent exchange of glances, the warmth shared against the long memory of cold. Sometimes Cole thought of his father, of the empty years that had followed, and the strange, quiet gift of being needed again. He did not chase away the sorrow. It lived there with him, softened and made bearable by the steady companionship of the two animals who had become his family. In the silence, he learned to let grief be just one note in the song of living, always present, but no longer the only sound. Outside, the world thawed. The snow melted from the banks of the river, flooding the meadows with the cold sweetness of new beginnings. Wildflowers pushed tentative shoots through the black mud, and geese traced their bright lines north across the sky. In the small town, people lingered a little longer on their stoops, the shape of their faces changed by gentler weather, the knowledge of survival passing quietly between them. On a Sunday morning, Cole and Briscoe walked the length of the old riverside path, their footprints side by side in the damp earth. Pip darted ahead, splashing through shallow puddles, the the sound of his joy carrying back to them on the breeze. Cole paused at the water's edge, watching Briscoe sniff the air, gaze intent on something unseen. For a moment, everything else faded, the ache of old wounds, the weight of what had been lost. All that remained was the steady rhythm of breath, the living pulse of earth underfoot, and the simple miracle of presence. There was no epiphany, no sudden closure, just a quiet knowing that the act of staying, of choosing to care even when the world turns cold, is enough. That healing, when it comes, is not loud or triumphant, but found in the accumulation of days, the echo of kindness, the willingness to risk being changed. The sun rose a little higher, warmth seeping into the frozen ground. Cole turned toward home, Briscoe falling into step beside him, Pip racing ahead. Behind them, the marks in the mud faded slowly, swallowed up by new grass. Ahead, the path curved out of sight, waiting, open and unhurried, a space for whatever would come next. In Bend, life moved forward, quietly mending itself. In the silence that followed, the lesson lingered, that all it takes is one hand reaching out, one creature refusing to give up, one act of quiet, unremarkable mercy, and a whole world, broken by winter, can begin again. Sometimes, the deepest healing comes in silence, in the quiet bond between a man and a dog, in the slow forgiveness of old wounds, and the small mercies that knit a broken world back together. Maybe it isn't grand gestures or perfect endings that save us, but the willingness to stay, just to stay, when the storm is at its fiercest. If this story touched your heart, take a moment and type Amen if you still believe in second chances, or share a story of kindness that changed your life, no matter how small. Tell us, have you ever found hope in an unexpected place? Your words might be the light someone else needs tonight. Thank you for being here. If you believe that compassion and loyalty can heal even the deepest scars, let us know where you're watching from, or share your own journey in the comments. May we all find our way home, just as Cole and Briscoe did, one gentle day at a time.